Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tamara Ecker, Executive Director of British American Business in New York. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you, as well as our panelists, to today's session, which is part of BAB's Inclusion and Diversity series called The Stir. Now nearly a decade old, The Stir acknowledges a shift from internal conversation siloed amongst female professionals to a broader conversation for all to have around not only gender parity issues, but also diversity, inclusion, and issues that impact minorities of all types. Together with our partners, BAB continues to remain vigilant in addressing these issues via a series of content-rich and community-building programs featuring the latest research, best practices, and real-world examples to make our case. Which could not be a better segue into acknowledging and thanking Tata Consultancy Services for their support as the SIR series underwriter. And to kick off today's program, before we dive into our panel, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Balaji Ganapathy, Chief Social Responsibility Officer and the Global Head of CSR at Tata Consultancy Services, where he focuses on harnessing power of purpose, people, and technology to advance equity and inclusion across societies. Under Balaji's leadership, TCS has leveraged its technology, innovation, and global pool of skill-based volunteers to make a significant impact on the communities in which TCS employees live and work, with a special focus on impacting women and young girls, minorities, and underrepresented groups. Balaji speaks regularly on topics related to business, HR, and CSR, and is an active champion of deriving social good through public and private partnerships. Balaji, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara, and welcome everybody to today's conversation. Tamara shared a little bit of background about our work with BAB. I want to thank her and the team, even during the pandemic and the challenges that are posed by that for an organization like BAB. We were able to put this program together and meet with all of you and talk to all of you and engage you in what I believe is a very relevant and very meaningful conversation. To set the context, I want to share a few points about why this is important, why now, and the role that we can play both from a company perspective on what we do for our businesses, what we do for our employees, but also from a community perspective, what we can do for people where we live and work, and how we can engage nonprofit organizations and others who are facing a lot of challenges during this time. So TCS as a global technology leader, this is an area which is really important to us. And, I want to first of all share that when we first envisaged working together with BAB in this topic, it was a broad area. And last year, we produced a series around intersectionality and looking at diversity and inclusion from a lens of intersectionality, from what is happening with businesses, what is happening with people who are employed in organizations, entrepreneurs, capital market, as well as in the community, what is happening. Today's conversation is more topical to the challenges that people are facing, businesses are facing, and communities are facing with a confluence of multiple crises, right? The COVID pandemic hit us in a really challenging way as a world and as a society a few months ago. And many of the businesses around the world and countries around the world swung into action very quickly. I'm very proud and happy to share that TCS as a technology organization, we were able to pivot very quickly and first of all, look at the health and well-being of our own employees. We have 430,000 employees across 50 countries, and that was our primary focus, to ensure that we provide those employees with the right kind of support and the resources to be able to stay safe, take care of themselves and their families. The immediate next step was to look at how to support our customers, especially given that customers across various segments and domains are providing critical services in the healthcare, in the government, pharmaceutical, utilities, retail, and logistics and other spaces. And that is what we were able to do very quickly. And by establishing a new model called secure borderless workspaces, we were able to move about 95% of our employees into a remote environment where they continue to be productive, effective, and engaging with our customers and engaging with each other, but in a remote model. And why I mentioned that is because much like companies, what communities and people need during this time is also the essence of grit and resilience. On the one hand, the COVID pandemic has impacted businesses in a very significant way. And on the other hand, it has impacted communities also in a very significant way. If I share with you the latest Harris poll, from May to now, the percentage of Americans who believe that they are already impacted or will be impacted financially has grown from about 60% to 83%. So it is impacting almost every other person that we know and engage with around the country. 30 million Americans filed for unemployment in the last cycle, which means that about 10% of our entire country is still facing tremendous challenges from an employment perspective. And add to that the crisis that came about with the massive outpouring of the systemic racial and social injustices that have prevailed in the country, came to a real crossroads with the killings of several Black Americans, African Americans, including George Floyd, and the protests that followed that. It is important to really put all of that in perspective, because the systemic inequities that exist that prevent young Americans, young people around the world from participating in opportunities in the new economy, whether it is men or women of color, whether it is LGBTQ community, or even people who are participating in the economy but are today being impacted because the disparate impact of COVID is falling on them, especially given that the care economy, taking care of our kids and our elders, is also at a really inflection point, real big inflection point. I think it is posing even more challenges. So today's conversation and today's panel is going to focus on a variety of topics that touch upon these areas. But I want to end with a couple of points. One is the gratitude to all of the healthcare and frontline workers who've been keeping us safe and continuing to work on both a vaccine to prevent the disease and a drug to cure it. And I'm very optimistic that those efforts will bear fruition in the next 6 to 9 months time frame. And the second point is that the resilience of people, as I mentioned, these challenges are also giving us opportunities, more opportunities for remote work, more opportunities, especially for people who are disabled or having other social challenges, to be able to work in a work environment. And the opportunity that we have as companies, as society, as people, to engage a larger cross-section and take a reset and make it a more inclusive journey going forward. So I really look forward to hearing thoughts from all of the panelists and continuing this conversation along with BAB. Thank you all for participating, and looking forward to learning a lot and contributing to this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Balaji. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's joined us today. My name is Jennifer Stanzl, and I look after the talent management and diversity agenda for our 19,000 employees in UK and Ireland. So I'm dialing in from sunny London today. And I'm absolutely delighted to be the moderator for today's discussion. I think, as Balaji highlighted, it's a time like never before. And whilst we're all in the same storm, we're not all in the same boat. And it's really important to recognize that and the current context that we're in. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today, and I'm excited to hear their perspectives and insights on the topic of the power of inclusion and how we can lead our organizations and communities through this crisis. Just before we go into the panel discussion, I'd like to highlight a few house rules. We're going to have about 35 minutes of discussion. And then we're going to hand over to you listeners. So we're really keen to hear your questions. Please put in the questions in the Q&A section. So if you hover over your menu on the bottom of the Zoom, you can see a Q&A section. So feel free to start typing in your questions now as we go along. After the facilitated conversation, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. And we do apologize if we don't get to yours, but we will try our best. The session is being recorded and can be shared with you upon request. That's it, I think, from the house rules perspective. The other thing is, I think we're looking to have a really open and authentic conversation and have a psychological space to share. So please be curious with empathy, share questions that can really help us take forward this conversation. What we're focusing on today is how do we actually refocus and prioritize inclusion and diversity efforts in crisis. Ways to communicate efforts to customers and stakeholders, and how do we foster inclusive leadership and steer leaders to be stronger allies. And we'll be walking through some of those key topics. To introduce our panel, I'm going to hand over to them to share a little bit more about themselves, but they're all award-winning, incredible individuals, experts in their fields, and they're at the forefront of driving some of the most fundamental change in society and in their own businesses. We have Dr. Sylvia Bartley, Senior Global Director at the Medtronic Foundation. We have Justin Dean, Managing Director and Partner and Office Leader at the Washington, D.C. Boston Consulting Group. We have Marjane Moore-Roberts, who's the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer from Constituency Management Group. So I'd just like to hand over to them for a quick introduction. Sylvia, would you like to start?
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much for having me and for providing this great platform to have this very important and critical discussion. As mentioned, my name's Sylvia Bartley. I work for the Medtronic Foundation. Medtronic is the largest standalone medical device company in the world. We serve about 75 million patients per year, and we're in over 140 different countries. Medtronic is a company that's really grounded in our mission to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And also with the tenet 6 of our mission, which is really around maintaining good citizenship. So the foundation really homes in on the mission and lifts up underserved populations worldwide. So that is who I am, and that's who Medtronic is. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
Excellent, fantastic to have you there. Justin, do you want to go next?
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Justin Dean. I'm a Managing Director and Partner at the Boston Consulting Group and lead our Washington, D.C. office. A little bit about the Boston Consulting Group. We're a global consulting firm kind of operating in over 100 offices worldwide on a variety of different industries and functional areas. So I'm glad to be on this glad to be on this discussion. Also in my role at BCG, I help lead our Black and Latinx efforts in North America. So have been working kind of with our firm leadership in response to topics of racial equity and social justice and a lot of the accelerating areas of that recently.
Brilliant, thank you. Great to have you, Justin. Marjane?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marjane Moore-Roberts. I am currently the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Constituency Management Group, which is a division of IPG that houses our public relations firms like Weber and Golan, as well as experiential marketing and our sports and talent management sections. Prior to joining Constituency Management Group, I was the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity for Yahoo. I spent about 6 years at Yahoo, focused mostly on digital advertising. And then in the last 2 years, I became their Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So I've always been interested in this topic based on the intersection between market impact and internal alignment. Became very clear to me that how our teams are made up and what our teams understand about diversity and inclusion in the world will impact the success of our business. And so I'm thrilled to join this discussion today and look forward to just learning from my colleagues and learning from all of you as well.
Excellent. Fantastic to have you as well. And perhaps to kick off the conversation, it'd be really interesting to know from all of you, how have companies evolved in the way they regard and approach inclusion and diversity over the years, and in particularly now in the wake of 2020?
Yeah, I'll start. I recall in 2016 when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling and, the incidents with the Dallas Police Department, and I think Mike Brown having that rear. The companies were at that time very, very much afraid of embracing Black Lives Matter and tying that to their brands. What's different now in 2020 and being in PR in particular is that companies, they couldn't get to that hashtag fast enough. And so I think in this reckoning, it's been an interesting moment for organizations to start to evaluate what they really believe and what their values are and how they want to align with the issues and the social crisis, if you will, that their constituencies and their employees care about. So that's one big change I've seen. The other one that I think is evolving in front of our eyes is that, companies no longer can only pay attention to how they show up in the market in terms of what they sell and what their product is. Companies have to take a much more holistic view of who they are. They need to care about, yes, the products and services that they put in market, but they also need to care about how they show up in terms of internal alignment and equity and how they engage on social issues. So it's a much more holistic point of view around diversity and inclusion versus just having one point of view that sort of lives in the corner office of either HR or the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. So that's one big change I've seen.
Excellent. So it's almost a new beginning in the sense how you position yourself as an organization, really, truly your purpose, what you stand for. So an opportunity to look at that. Thank you. Would Sylvia or Justin, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think Marjane said it perfectly. She really captured the changes really well. But just building on what she said, I think the next generation is demanding it. So they are looking at organizations, not just for the products that they sell or how big the organization is or their reputation, but really on how they're showing up in that corporate social responsibility space. And they are making decisions based on that. So that is one big shift that companies are aware of, and they're recognizing they have to do something about it as well. And then just secondly, I think it is showing up in the way that we do business. As Marjane says, sometimes if you look at tenders, they want you to prove that you are being socially responsible. And if you can't prove that, then you cannot apply for that tender to sell your product in particular hospitals. And I know that is the case in the United Kingdom. However, we still have a long way to go when we talk about diversity and inclusion, because I believe in the United States, there is a big momentum and there's an epiphany and there's an awakening, particularly with the George Floyd. But all of the panelists here will say, well, we know that this has existed for decades, if not centuries. So we're glad there is an epiphany, and now let's see the sustaining change. But I do think outside of the United States, we still have lots of work to do, because they're still our colleagues, whether they are global companies and they're sitting outside the United States, that feel very isolated because sometimes those policies don't apply outside of the United States. So I think that's where there is work still to be done, and recognizing that should be a focus area as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the biggest change that you see as well is getting this right is more than just a compliance issue. It can provide a strategic advantage to your company. And, you look at it, we've looked at it several different ways in terms of valuation, in terms of internal perception. This does provide benefit and value internal to your shareholders, to your community, and to your employees when you get it right and think holistically, as Sylvia and Marjane have mentioned. And I think this time period has put greater emphasis on that. But I do challenge to say, how do we actually make sure that we can sustain this energy and emotion that we all feel so much right now? And I think that's going to be a critical piece.
Yeah, great.
Right. Yeah. So something to really reflect on, I think, how to keep that momentum, as you were saying, Justin. And I think kind of moving into the next question, and I think some of it you highlighted, is that if it's very much strategically integrated, it should stay a priority. But because we're fighting a crisis on so many multiple fronts, sometimes I&D is sidelined. And what are your thoughts on really safeguarding the I&D efforts in organizations?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of put my perspective. I don't think you should safeguard it in kind of a corner of the organization. I think it should be integrated into everything that you do. A position of equity and inclusion and diversity should be core to your operations and your business practices and strategy, and how you go to market, how you market different products, how you think about suppliers and supplier diversities, how you define your philanthropic efforts. It should be a core piece of your overall strategy versus something on the side that you're doing to check a box. And once it's ingrained kind of into those activities and people understand the value in and of it, then it becomes self-sustaining versus an activity that I think people are, call it forced to do. The analog I often look at with a lot of companies is you think about the movement around sustainability that corporations made 10 years ago. I work in the energy space. At that point, oftentimes ideas around environment, climate, and sustainability were compliance. Now those are embedded into kind of every business's kind of core operations, because now everybody sees the value that it brings across multiple dimensions. Inclusion and diversity is no different and provides a similar kind of level of value, if not more, and should be kind of integrated into just how companies go to work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, to Justin's point, it really does have to live, your organization has to live and breathe it. And to the extent that people are sort of phoning it in or bolting it on as a last minute part of their marketing strategy, I think they do so at their own peril. You said something important, this latest sort of reckoning around race relations and systemic inequity in our society has come at a really difficult time for the world, not just the country and the world. And I love the way you put it. We're in the same storm, but not the same boat. And one of the hardest things about doing diversity and inclusion work is helping the dominant groups, no matter where you are, really understand the experience of people who are not part of that dominant group and part of those norms, really illuminating what systemic inequity looks like. And when COVID-19 hit and, we started to see the numbers roll in around how Black and brown people were getting the disease, as high as 5 times in certain regions, as high as 5 times as often as our white counterparts, and then dying as much as 2 times as much as those counterparts. The inequities, the compounded inequities that contribute to that really started to have a concrete look and feel, and people were no longer thinking of that in a theoretical way. And so, what I think the moment can teach us and show us is that now is definitely not the time for you to step back and step away from your inclusion and diversity efforts. Now, if anything, now is the time to step up. And what we're encouraging people to do is to really look at your brand holistically. When folks are saying, I want to make a statement, I have to make a statement about Black Lives Matter and a hashtag associated with my brand, immediately they got called out. Immediately, if you did not have a history, if you did not have a track record of contributing and talking about these issues in the past, it was very difficult for you to get into a conversation. We tracked 90 million impressions in a week around Black Lives Matter at the height of the crisis, where COVID-19 only had 30 million over the course of 30 days or something like that. The numbers were extraordinary. So it proves the case that if a brand is not in that conversation, they are missing an incredibly important cultural moment. And the brands that got it wrong in a big way. And the brands that got it right are going to be rewarded, right? They're going to have loyalty. I didn't like Ben and Jerry's for whatever reason. I'm not an ice cream person. But after I saw the platform and the position they took around Black Lives Matter and their platform around white supremacy, I'm buying Ben and Jerry's. You know, I'm into it. And so it 100% matters. And for brands and clients who decide to pull away at a time when we're in crisis, when brown and Black people are really, the inequities that we face every day are really being brought to the surface in an undeniable way, those brands are going to have to be held accountable for that. And it would be a mistake to walk away now.
Oh, wow. There were so many golden nuggets, I think, in both of your answers. And what I loved, Marjane, what you were saying is around there's a brand authenticity, right? So it's not just that you put out a hashtag, now I'm standing for this, even though you'll get a lot out of it right now, but you'll be quickly called upon. But even a reflection of saying, you know what, I haven't done enough. I've been ignorant, I've been complacent. I need to learn more, I need to educate myself, and I need to do more, and I can do more. And I think those brands who've even said that showed an incredible authenticity, and not just brands, but also leaders. I think leaders who've stepped into that space of unknowing, unfamiliarity, and vulnerability mostly, I think have really, you know, been able to navigate these difficult times.
Can I add something on that, if I may?
Yes.
Yeah. I love the quote too, the same storm, different boat. And then I think about Ken Fraser, CEO of Merck, and he said so eloquently, companies that are doing platitudes and donations, that is a really good start. But we have to cultivate our own gardens. And if you're complicit with the racial inequities in your organization, then you are complicit with systemic racism. And I think, again, building on what Marjane says so eloquently, is companies have got to look inside and look also at their diversity and inclusion numbers and how that is sustainable over a period of time. And it is great that companies are giving to Black organizations and about time. However, they have to look internally. And if we look at the number of Black CEOs, I think we've got 5 now. There was 4 before this, now we have 5 out of all the Fortune 500 companies. And then look at the pipeline to that, it's even, you know, non-existent. So this is where we have to start. So giving hundreds of millions to organizations is great, but how about paying your staff the correct amount of money, giving them the right insurance, and then investing within your own organization? Then secondly, I want to add the same storm, the different boats. We can enforce diversity and inclusion on our employees. We can do all of these community conversations and have the D&I expert come in to train and educate people, but you're still going to get a group of people that are just not interested and they don't want to know. And I've heard some stories from people that do the diversity and inclusion. One particular company had to shut down the chat because of the nasty rhetoric that was being said in there by their employees during a D&I conversation. So it's really about the culture. And what culture do you want for your organization? What do you do with those kind of employees? How do you manage through that? And the top-down approach is a good approach, but we have to get to those middle managers that really set the weather and the tone for employees that are working day in and day out. And it really goes down to the culture. So how bold are you to change your culture that you're going to eradicate those kinds of attitudes in a corporation?
Yeah, that's an amazingly important point, Dr. Bartley. I'm so happy you made it. I feel like what we have missed, you know, I've been doing D&I since 2016, 2015, not very long by most standards. But I think what we missed as practitioners is this idea that we were supposed to take on this work. And our job is really to enable the organizations to do this work. Everyone has a role to play. We looked at a stat that said that 80% of our employees spend 90% of their time with their immediate manager and their teams, right? So if your executives can have an important commitment, they can be swinging from the rooftops and singing about D&I all they want. But if that's not translating to the culture, as Dr. Bartley just said, then you're missing the point. And that's the reason why you see turnover so high. Everybody has a role to play. And for organizations to really be successful, it has to be deeply embedded in every single system, from recruiting to hiring to onboarding to development. And your middle leaders have to have the same level of accountability, if not more, than your executives. That's the only way to change these behaviors. That's the point of the day. It has to happen where the people experience the business, and that's with their immediate managers and their teams.
And I think it really speaks to this idea of everyday inclusion, or the microaggressions. And I think I once heard, microaggressions almost death by 1,000 cuts, because you constantly have these small little things. And I'm wondering, Justine, if you want to speak about, there was a fantastic Boston Consulting research that you were part of. And I think it had some really interesting insights that actually goes into how do you develop that culture. Would you like to share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure thing. So this was a study we took on about 2 years ago now that looked globally, globally across kind of inclusive environments, and was just, I think the findings, just provided data to what I think we all kind of had a hypothesis around. But the order of magnitude of how much different elements of diversity actually impacted your feeling of inclusiveness was quite stark. So, depending on kind of each piece or significant, or each, diversity qualification that you have. So if it's one layer of diversity, if I'm a Black man, I'm more likely to feel, 6 to 7% percentage points lower than kind of, my white male counterpart is about to be inclusive into my own company. If I were a Black woman, that number would then go to 10%. And then if that, if you kind of layered on a third element, whether it's let's say a LGBTQ woman, Black woman, that is up to 15 to 20%, depending on kind of the country or region. And that's astounding if you actually think about what that means in terms of your ability to bring your authentic self to work, to focus on just the job at hand and not focus on, do I belong here? Am I supported? And all of these other things, versus just kind of focusing on the task at hand. So, as we started looking at how to actually drive an inclusive environment, I think several of those findings still held true. But I'll echo kind of the points that Sylvia and Marjane made, is it's not only about getting kind of the commitment at the top, but what I also often encourage people to do is from research from John Rice, who leads Management Leadership for Tomorrow, which is a great nonprofit organization kind of focused on underrepresented minority organizations. But he helps to focus on getting your diverse staff through their first promotion point, get them to that middle management. And that tackles two issues that we've discussed so far today. One, it brings a different culture to that front line that changes the culture of a company, because now these people are kind of, you're seeing more people that look like you if you're coming into that level. You're changing the environment kind of, that perpetuates that culture. And then you're actually developing a stronger pipeline to make it to your executive ranks. And if not at your company, their next position, they'll be better positioned to get to a more senior role. I think too often, if you look at your own company statistics, you'll see a divide in terms of, what does the profile of somebody that gets to their first promotion point look like relative to people that don't make it. And that's a big step that I think a lot of companies can make to drive significant and meaningful change in their organization.
Excellent. I think that's a really interesting point. We started something in TCS, which has been really interesting, called Allies of Diversity, to really create that everyone should actually be an ally. And how do you create a culture of inclusion at every point? So managers play a key role, but as much the key work of, your colleagues and your team members. So I think that's been a really interesting approach for us as well. I want to, some questions are coming in, which is fantastic. And I would encourage anyone that does have a questions, please put it in the Q&A. We'll be shortly moving into the audience questions. I want to just come back to the topic of, the tragedy of George Floyd and the kind of the protest and this moment in time, as I think Dr. Bartley, Sylvia, you were mentioning, this is not the first time this is happening, unfortunately, and it's been for many, many years, but how come now seems like there's so much more attention towards it? And how can we actually make a real change and sustain that change? And what can companies really do? So I'm wondering if, I don't know, Justin or you'd like to maybe start with that question.
Sure, I'm happy to take a start. I think Dr. Bartley said it best, where this has been going on for years. My dad grew up my dad grew up in the southern part of the U.S. in the 50s and 60s, and some of the same stories he told as a youth were some of the same things that I experienced as a youth, as some of the same things I'm experiencing now, which is tragic, for lack of a better term. So, while I would say following the events of George Floyd, while I do appreciate the energy now, I was actually a bit disheartened because we were still dealing with these same events after so long. But I do appreciate that this does have more energy around it. This has been a catalytic moment, I think, for so many, probably combined with the pandemic and being kind of quarantined at home. There's several different factors that have played into it. My question is, how are you going to sustain this? Right? I think it goes beyond commitments, and I think it's how do you actually start to drive policy change, drive structural change that will exist beyond this news cycle, so that whatever this emotion and energy that's feeling now will have legs well beyond this 2020, but actually drive meaningful change. And if you're not looking at using this as an opportunity to influence policy within your company or even within your community or state and local governments, I think it's missing out on a great opportunity to do that.
Great, thank you.
I think why is this a catalytic moment for the world, not just in the United States? I think I want to go back to, I think it was 1955 with the murder and lynching of Emmett Till. And when you think about that horrific incident, today no one has been convicted for that awful crime. But what his mother did was show the casket to the public. And when the public saw the casket, that was a catalytic moment. Now, many deaths had occurred before then, and they were in the height of the civil rights movement, but that really brought it to the forefront and outraged people because of what they saw. And if you fast forward to George Floyd, what did we see? We saw a man being murdered in broad daylight in view of a camera, complicitly without caring, and literally asphyxiating a man in front of everybody. And I think that is a moment, the epiphany moment, where people were like, wow, racism does exist, because Derek Chauvin did it because he knew the system would protect him. Right. And so that ties back to that systemic racism. And so therefore people felt compelled to stand up and say enough is enough. And I think for African Americans and Black people around the world, all of that suppression and compartmentalizing of the microaggressions, of the direct racism, the systemic racism that plagues our community centuries after centuries, that bubbled up, and people are like, well, enough is enough. If this isn't our moment to really speak our mind and demand justice, then when is? And I think that is why the world has reacted that way. And also this is why companies have responded, because Charlottesville was one thing, but watching a murder live on TV is an absolute another thing that people can't deny.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think there was something about watching that man put his knee on another man's neck in broad daylight until the point that he died that was very difficult to ignore. But I want to add to that as well, because I think there's a few other things, a few other trends that have been happening that also make it very difficult to deny that systemic racism is in fact a thing. And one of them is Amy Cooper. If you remember that week was bookended by the death of George Floyd, and then the behaviors of Amy Cooper in the park when she's a white woman, had her dog off leash in an area of Central Park in New York, where you're not supposed to have your dogs off leash. It's a bird watching sanctuary. And an African-American man asked her to leash her dog, and she got so offended and so just appalled that she would be asked to do this, that she decided to call and, call the police, call 911 and fake that she was in danger, and fake that a black man, she kept saying, a black man is attacking me. I'm going to tell them a black man's attacking me. And then she proceeded to do it. She knew full well, to Dr. Bartley's point, that she could weaponize that, she could do this in broad daylight, and she thought she wouldn't get in trouble. She went a step further to me, because she weaponized her whiteness. And luckily that day he did not die, but he very well could have. He very well could have, considering what we saw with George Floyd. And so I would offer that in addition to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and just, you know, countless others at this point, that seeing what people would consider, you know, a corporate executive, a white woman walking through Central Park, act out in this way on camera, right? To the point where she was willing to risk this man dying was also a catalyst for what we're seeing now. There's no way to deny that this, you know, people look at a George Floyd scenario and think, what did he do wrong? He had a record. He resisted arrest. They have all kinds of reasons to try and validate or justify those behaviors. But when you look at an Amy Cooper, when you look at other examples of quote unquote Karens, which I don't love that example, but, you know, just to make the point, Black people being accused of crimes, doing everyday things, walking while Black, driving while Black, going to do all these other things. All of a sudden, it's an overwhelming body of evidence. And if you are on the wrong side of that, if you still choose to ignore that, then now your sensibilities are being called into question. And so my sense is that people, again, this is one of those scenarios, one of those moments in time when you can be on the right side of crazy or you can be on the wrong side of crazy. And I think that anyone who's denying that this exists today, and once you admit it, once you acknowledge that it's real, and if you still choose to sit still, that's still another level of accountability that you'll need to face. So I think we're at a different moment, and I hope I hope that the coalitions at the protests we're seeing across race, across gender, across ethnicity. I had friends who converted their Pride Month into all of their Pride energy into, you know, Black trans lives and Black Lives Matter for the LGBTQ community. This is just an unprecedented outpouring. And I think that in and of itself will generate a new level of change that we've not seen before.
Very powerful words, and I think those two examples are so powerful that they actually you know, came at the same time. That really helped the momentum, and I think to show the systemic racism that exists, and hopefully how we can convert this now into true sustainable change. There are lots of questions coming in, so I think we can start with someone then. And I'm seeing quite a few questions coming in really on, you know, what's next, what are actions companies can do, what are actions individuals can do. And I think we're also talking about, okay, maybe the leaders get it, but we're missing the kind of in-between piece. How do we really make this a widespread initiative? Would anyone like to pick that one up?
I can share what our company is doing. Because I think, you know, individual companies, they need to do what aligned with their strategy and their value and the ethos of the company. And in Medtronic, we are very much focused on employees, and this is not work that is done overnight. Now, I'm not a D&I person. I oversee our volunteer engagement. So, you know, I'm just talking about my little personal experience here. And in Medtronic, we started this journey many years ago. It's not something that, again, happens overnight. About 7 to maybe 9 years ago, when we had a new CEO, Dr. Omar Ishrak, he was very committed on looking at all of our employee resource groups and seeing how we can kind of pull them together, galvanize them, and be more strategic in how we address the issues with our employee resource groups, affinity groups. So we had a ton of employee resource groups. They were led by individuals in the organization, which is great, and they were doing their thing to address their communities. But our CEO wanted it to be more strategic. How does it impact not just our communities, but also our business? And then looking at what are our numbers and how do we shift those numbers, and really treating it as if you were treating a, you know, doing a AOP, annual operating plan in your organization. And so he looked at the groups. He formed 4 networks: African Descent Network, Women's Network, Asian Network, and Hispanic networks. And he called upon the most senior people in those particular affiliation groups, called them in and asked them to pull together a leadership team to develop a strategy in how we're going to address diversity and inclusion for those particular groups. And those people had to do it. They were the most senior in the company. They had to do it. They called together a leadership team. And for 4 years, we strategized around what are our numbers? How do we compare to benchmark? So I was on the African descent leadership team, and the first thing we did was, what are the numbers? How do we benchmark? We were terrible against benchmark. And our focus was, how do we create that pipeline and bring that up? And literally said, forget about the cookie, selling cookies in the communities. How do we drive these numbers? And at that point, African Americans were leaving Medtronic at the rate of knots. And when you didn't have many in the first place, that was hugely impactful. And so there was the stop the bleeding, and then how do we move forward? And not only about the numbers of employees, but then when we look at our patients and the communities we serve, are we reflecting that also? So when I said 75 million patients, how many of those are Black? How many patients are we serving from that particular population? And the other groups had to do the same. So we had that business element together with the employee element, and then there was the community element as well. And then thirdly, how do you hold people accountable? Every quarter, our CEO has quarterly business reviews with each business. Now there is a whole day committed to these networks. Each network has to come in, they prepare like they would for any business in front of the CEO and the executive committee. They have to explain the strategy, the programs, leading with metrics, how are we driving change, and being feet to the fire about why we are not driving that change. And that's done in partnership, of course, with HR. And that was work that took, 7, 8 years to formulate that solid ground. And then with COVID-19 and disparities with African Americans and other groups from ethnic minorities, together with the uprising, awakening, epiphany, whatever you want to call it, they called directly on the African Descent Network and said, what should we do? How should we respond? Formulated committees, and our response was purely based on that network because we built that foundation and the employees engaged, knowing their communities, knowing exactly how they feel. So we led that effort, and they were very much in partnership with us to lead that effort. And I think that's tremendous. It's just one example, but I think it's tremendous. It took a period of time in order for that to solidify. You had to get an alignment with all of these different groups, but we were ready to respond to George Floyd because that work was done. And our new CEO is just taking on that mantle and he's bringing it to the next level because he was part of that process. And one last thing, the managers are held accountable. It's now in their objectives. The leaders of the groups, it's in their objectives, and they got to explain what they're doing and how they're doing it. So hopefully this is a sustainable model, and it's not just about a person. He has left, the next person is leading it, and there's an army of people around who are moving forward with that plan.
It's amazing.
Fantastic example. Yeah. I love how your employee resource groups are so strategically integrated, and also how you use them to tune in. I think critical with employee resources is that they can help you understand what's happening in the whole system, and often in the areas which you might not hear about. So fantastic. Thank you. Does anyone else want to add what they've done in their organization that's really worked and created sustainable change?
I'll just add to, I think, Dr. Bartley's comment. That's fantastic, by the way. I commend you and the organization for thinking holistically in that way. I think in many of the conversations that I've had with our clients and internal at BCG as well, it is thinking holistically across those three levers, both your business practices, your internal strategy, and kind of how you think around your community and development. And then using data with the same rigor you address any other problem to kind of hold people to account. I think the one thing I would just kind of emphasize, in addition, is it has to be co-led. It's with both management and frontline, both with diverse populations and non-diverse populations. I think our experience has been kind of, I've seen it skew one way or the other, where it's like, you put almost everything on a diverse population, or the Black population, the Black research group, to say, tell me what you need, right? Versus let's co-develop what you need and understand what you need together, which has helped us to kind of drive new results. And then I think, from a consulting firm standpoint, after the events in late May, we've had several of our clients pick up the phone and call. And, what we've actually been able to do is be a channel for many strong minority businesses that do this exceptionally well, and get them a seat at the table, where they bring kind of a very new strategic view that, you know, BCG might not have directly, but actually able to meet that supply with that demand. So I think that's also something we've been able to do, and we've been proud of being able to kind of help on that dimension as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that listen, I was on the business side for a long time, and you know, what I was able to pick up is that, you know, there was a moment in time where there was a shift in the demographics of our country that just became imminent. And that combination of accelerated buying power along with those demographic shifts really creates a new market. And brands are trying to get new clients all the time. They're looking for ways to engage with those new clients. And so if you consider, you know, the buying power of, you know, people of color over the next, you know, 2.5, 3 years is going to reach $5 trillion. That's one projection. And, you know, the population is going to be at least 50% non-white. Then companies have to start paying attention to how they connect and engage with those communities. What we were seeing sort of definitively, right? We said, you know, at the intersection of, in a PR company, you know, many big brands, is that, you know, frankly, the demand for those perspectives, the demand for people who understood how to engage with the Black community, the demand for people who understood how to write those Black Lives Matter statements was quite significant. Right, we were stretched to get there, and what it illustrated, or what it illuminated for our organization is we have to get more serious about this because our clients need it. We are not doing our work if we are not prepared to address the needs of the diverse marketplace. And that means bringing more diverse voices in-house. It means elevating those diverse voices to the point where they're influencing strategy. And frankly, you know, the hard thing for us to come to terms with is that if you want change, the organizations have to change. You can't bring in a ton of diversity and expect everything to stay exactly the same. So it's not about an individual assimilating into the organization. It's about the organization assimilating, the organization expanding to accommodate the diversity in order for them to be viable and relevant for the future marketplace. So I really think that the core here, I love the moral imperative. It's been there for 30, 40 years before I was born, frankly. It will probably be there much longer. But what I see moving people, what I see getting people motivated in business, in the business world, money. Mm-hmm. The business imperative is driving the change in behavior. And, you know, I'll take it because sometimes people do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And if that gets us 2 steps closer to where we want to be, I'm okay with that. But I really think, you know, for those who are asking what to do, zone in on the business case, zone in on what your clients need, zone in on your brand's ability to deliver. And if you can't deliver, if a client said you must have a diverse team and you can't deliver on that today, then that's your starting point. That's your business case to get it moving. So that's what I would start with first.
Excellent. I think those are fantastic points, and also great to put the moral and the business case and how relevant those are in combination, actually. And I think most of the questions coming in are very much about, you know, what to do, how to integrate it, how to make it systemic. And I think you've covered quite a few of those points. I'd like to just pivot kind of in the final bit of our conversation to communities and the importance of actually also the inequalities in communities. And I know Balaji and TCS in our organization, they've done some incredible work in really upskilling ethnic minorities or, you know, underdeserved communities with our Go IT programs and some incredible kind of tools for teachers to upskill in digital skills, which really, you know, we hope will equalize much more the employment opportunities. And I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to add, how you've been doing it, or your perspective on how we can really bring communities up.
Yeah, I'll take this. In Medtronic, I lead our volunteer engagement for all of our employees, and we also have a global health arm that really serves on increasing access to healthcare for underserved populations worldwide. And so we do that from the global health perspective. And one of the things we're doing now in response to George Floyd and the numerous murders before that is looking at the organizations that we serve and making sure that our organizations are diverse. So typically in philanthropy, organizations want to support, foundations want to support organizations that are very well established, that have a low, what's the word I'm looking for now? Overhead cost, that they're very kind of impactful in their communities. And that typically goes with those organizations that are big and large and have a strong history, but it doesn't include those smaller nonprofit organizations that are really serving in the heart of these communities. So for us, we're really shifting the way we look at who are we serving and how we're serving them, and then also looking at with them, how are they lifting up and what are they doing for those underserved populations. So just last week, we moderated a panel with our global health partners to have this discussion around disparities. It looks different in different countries and in different communities. It's different in India than it is in South Africa, than it is in America, than it is in the UK, but really homing in through their position in their communities to see what we can do once we've identified those differences. And then when it comes to our employees, we really are designing programs now for the first time where we choose partners, just like we do for global health and non-profit partners. We just partnered with an organization called Northside Achievement Zone. They have a model based on Harlem Achievement Zone, looking at those underserved population in the hardest hit areas of North Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and providing the parents with the wraparound services so the children go to school and concentrate on their education. And there's so many factors why people are not getting educated in Minnesota, particularly Black students. It has one of the largest academic achievement gaps in the country between Black and white students. So really partnering with those organizations and wrapping our employees around them, going really deep over a period of 3 years, in 3 years time period, to really make that difference and make the communities see us as Medtronic in the community, see Black faces like them, and let them know that this too is possible for them. Because right now they think Medtronic is a big white house on a hill and there's no road to Medtronic. And we really are focused on changing that, bringing our bodies in communities, helping them, hands-on volunteering all year round, being very visible and encouraging people that pipeline from these hardest hit areas into Medtronic. And we're not just doing that in the Twin Cities. Our plan is to scale that worldwide as well.
That's incredible. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And since we're coming close to our time, and I know, Dr. Bartley, you also have to leave a bit early, so please feel free. Thank you so much for your participation. Perhaps just as a final kind of closing note, I'd love to hear from everyone. What's next? What do you want? What's next for you? And what's the one thing you'd like to leave everyone that's participating today with?
Yeah, I'd like to just say thank you for the time, and I'd encourage everyone to think about what they can do within their own companies, within their own communities, to continue to drive change. I think, you know, as I want to make sure this is a sustainable energy in and around this topic, and actually thinking through, you know, how we don't. This isn't something that just is kind of passing with the next news cycle. So think about your own internal actions, think about the actions that you take on and how you can drive that change, not only today, but tomorrow and through the years to come.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. It's just been, you know, a pleasure to hear from my colleagues, my fellow panelists, and you know, talk about this issue. One of the things I always worry about is when, you know, I say when I'm not in the room, what's happening, you know, from a CDO perspective, when there's someone Black is not in the room, what's really happening? And so what I would encourage individuals to do is to be the voice of equity. Start to question, start to ask your colleagues and challenge your white colleagues, even when there aren't people of color in the room, about some of the decisions that they're making and some of the statements that they make. You have to believe that, you know, in the case of an A.B. Cooper, who was a very high-ranking, you know, executive within her company, I always think about, how did she affect someone's career? What kind of decisions did she make about whether or not someone got a job, or whether or not someone, you know, got that promotion who might have been, you know, on her team, or whose career she may have been able to influence? But even outside of people of color, I wonder, you know, what young up and coming white professional did she influence as well? how did she teach them about how to deal with business, and how did her beliefs and her behaviors impact other people who could have become allies, but instead may have chosen not to. And so for individuals, I would say just be the voice of equity, be the voice, don't just be a bystander when you're in the room, particularly when there aren't any people of color, but look for ways to challenge the environment and be an advocate for equity all the time. That actually goes a long way. And then lastly, I'd say for corporations, how are you going to use your platform to promote for the objective of inclusion and equity? You have big platforms, big resources most of the time. How are you going to put them to good use for good? And so that's your challenge I would leave you with.
And I will be very quick because I have to disappear to do another talk on racial disparities within Medtronic this time. And I'm the speaker, so I don't want to be too late. But Marjane she said my point so eloquently. It's about using your voice, and now is the time. And if you do not have the courage to use your voice now, I don't know when ever would be a better time to do so. And it starts with us. We've got to speak up. We've got to make sure that representation is there and that people's voices are heard, because decisions are made when you are not in the room. And so who are in these rooms, and how do you influence those decisions? And don't stay silent, because even though you may not feel that you are applying a racist lens, you know, this unconscious bias is really strong. So really just be mindful about that and leverage this moment to use your voice and really be an advocate for change. And with that, I humbly thank you all for a really fantastic discussion. I thank the organizers, my phenomenal panelists, and I really hope we have the opportunity to do this again, because you guys are pretty awesome. Thank you very much for your work and leadership.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr.
Good luck. Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. And just to close off, I want to say incredible thank you to Justin, to Dr. Bartley, to Marjane, to all the organizers, to the British American Business Association, to TCS who sponsored this. My takeaways are, I think this is the time, and adversity, they say, is the truest test of character and of leadership. So we're in a time where we can redefine who we want to be and how we want to show up. And that's true for an individual, for a leader, and for an organization. And now is the time we need the most to redefine how we're purpose-driven, how we're adaptable, how we're resilient as organizations and as individuals. And it's only collectively we can actually move forward. So thank you so much for those incredible insights, for your perspectives, for your experiences, for all the questions. I know we didn't get to all of them. There were lots more questions on what's next, what's D&I looking like in 2030. I think we'll have to move where we are now and hope to move along the way. Thank you so much for everyone that's joined us today. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Marjane.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.